Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring one of my favorite topics, Home Alone horror, combined with another favorite, Appalachia. Home Alone stories were actually what first got me into this type of content, mostly because when I was a teenager, I went through something very similar to what happens in the last story. I hope these stories keep you up at night the same way they did for me. As always, thank you so much for being here and for keeping this channel alive. Your support means more than you could ever imagine. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. I've never been the type to scare easy, but what happened that night in the mountains of West Virginia changed me in ways I still haven't fully processed. And honestly, if I hadn't been much of a scaredy cat before, what happened that night made me feel fear on a level I'd never experienced. I've only shared this story a handful of times, mostly with close friends, but I'll do my best to tell it here exactly the way it happened. I grew up in Raleigh County, just outside Beckley. If you're not from around here, you should know the geography makes a big difference. My family's cabin sits near the edge of the New River Gorge, about 20 minutes from the main road and a solid half-hour from town. The closest neighbor's half a mile away, and at night the hollers swallow up every bit of light except for your porch lamp. You could scream your lungs out there, and no one would ever hear you. Most of the time, though, that's actually the best part about living in these mountains, and it's always been my favorite thing about the place. When this happened, I was 24, working at a grocery store in Oak Hill. My parents were out of state visiting my aunt in Kentucky, so I agreed to keep the house locked up and feed the dogs. I didn't think twice about it. I'd spent plenty of nights up there by myself. That evening, I got off my shift late, around 10:30, but I didn't head straight home right away. By the time I finally started up the mountain road, it was pushing midnight. The gravel path to the cabin winds along the ridge, one way in and one way out. You don't stumble across it by accident. You have to know it's there. And that's exactly why what happened still unsettles me so much. The first strange thing I noticed was the dogs. We've got two hounds, both usually loud as hell the second headlights hit the driveway. But when I pulled up, they were silent. Not sleeping, not wagging their tails. Just rigid, staring into the tree line. For anyone who's ever had dogs, you know how intuitive they are, how protective. If something's wrong, or even about to be wrong, they're the first ones to pick up on it. And only an idiot would ignore their dog's warning, especially in a place like this. I'm not trying to generalize, some dogs are different. But when I tell you mine never got it wrong, I mean it. I went straight over to them, trying to figure out what had their attention. That's when I caught sight of antlers moving through the trees. I'd never seen a deer that close to the house before. They usually never came in that far. But at least now I had a reasonable explanation for the dog's reaction. So I let myself relax. Fed them, locked the porch door, and settled inside. No service up there, but we do have a landline. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating leftover pizza when I heard the sound of gravel crunching. Slow and deliberate footsteps coming from the side of the house. I swear my first thought was that the deer had to be either injured or starving to come that close to the house, especially with the dogs right there. But then I heard the porch steps creak, one by one. Someone was climbing them. I always thought that in a situation like this, I'd be the type to act fast. Keep a cool head. Grab my dad's shotgun and face whoever came up there. But I didn't. My mind froze on the dogs. I knew something had happened to them, because if they were still out there, they'd be barking their heads off, furious. Whoever was out there had done something to my dogs, and that thought alone kept me from thinking straight. I killed the lights and froze, just listening. I was desperate for the dogs to make a sound. Any sound. But outside the house there was nothing. Nothing except the noises of whoever was out there. The porch boards groaned under their weight. Then the doorknob rattled. And I realized someone was trying to force it open. They weren't worried about waking me if I'd been asleep. Whoever was on the other side was ready for a confrontation. They weren't just there to rob the place. That thought alone sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I bolted for the basement, grabbed my dad's shotgun, and then barricaded myself in the downstairs bathroom. Not only was it the room with the sturdiest door, it had just been replaced. But it also had a window I could jump out of if it came to that. As I shut the bathroom door, I could still hear the attempts to force open the front door. I gripped my dad's shotgun tighter, chambered it, and aimed at the door. I wanted to shout, to let them know I was armed, but something told me to stay quiet. Whoever it was hadn't come inside yet, and not knowing where I was could work in my favor. After a few seconds, the rattling stopped. Innocently, I thought maybe they'd given up after seeing the door wouldn't budge easily, but I quickly discarded that thought. No one was going to bother going up this gravel road just to quit. Minutes dragged on, and the outside of the house was silent. Were they still on the front porch? As if in response to my thought, I heard a sharp thump, like someone had jumped from the porch to the ground, and then footsteps moving around the house. Whoever it was, they were heavy and they weren't in a hurry. They were studying the place. Then came one of the scariest parts. I caught a shadow moving past the bathroom window and had to force myself not to scream. The man was enormous. The window distorted his proportions a bit, but he was still absolutely massive. Any hope I had of surviving a close-quarters fight vanished the second I saw that shadow. I knew the only thing I could do was call for help, then either hide or escape, using the forest I'd known since childhood as my shield. The worst part was that he froze in front of the window, then shifted slightly, like he was staring right at it. By that point, I was certain he couldn't see me, but my blood was roaring in my ears. The glass was reinforced, but if he had anything in his hand, and enough determination, he could have smashed it, and I was right there. If you asked me how long we stayed there, just inches apart, I couldn't tell you. When you're in a moment of absolute panic, your sense of time completely distorts. I kept thinking about the dogs, and by that point, I was certain I'd find them lifeless. I was panicked for my own life, but somehow that didn't matter as much compared to the thought of losing my dogs. Finally, he moved and went around to the back of the house, giving me the chance to quietly open the bathroom door, call my dad, and as coldly as I could, tell him I couldn't talk, but that he had to call the police immediately. I could have made the call myself, but then I'd have had to explain what was happening, where the house was, and a bunch of other things I didn't have time for if I wanted to get out of there alive. Fortunately, my dad didn't hesitate. I hung up and made my way up to the bedrooms. During the call, my dad had told me something that probably saved my life. In the hallway by my parents' room, there was an old fireplace that led to a hidden passage. It was a part of the house that had been ugly and difficult to fix, so my parents had ignored it and just built a wall in front of it. No one knew that little space existed, and the only entrance was through the fireplace. I hadn't even reached the room yet when I heard the kitchen window shatter. Then came a flurry of frantic footsteps, things being knocked over. I don't know how long I stayed in that hidden corridor, but I know it felt like forever. I also knew the police weren't going to find the house easily. I pressed my dad's shotgun against my chest when I heard the door to my parents' room open. And then a sound I never thought I'd hear in that context. It was like whoever was there was sniffing me out, like a dog would. I could hear the sniffing move closer to the fireplace, then circle it, and at that point, I wasn't even sure if it was a man on the other side. All I knew was that they were going to find me. Then I heard the sound of police sirens. They had just entered the gravel road. I heard muffled footsteps, someone running, and then everything went silent, except for the sirens in the distance, getting closer and closer. I cried before the police even reached me. I cried from relief and from the pain of thinking about my dogs. I didn't come out until the police knocked on the door, and I knew that whoever had been inside my house was gone. The police searched the house, took my statement, and asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. About an hour later, I asked one of the officers if I could check on the dogs. I couldn't imagine what I'd find, but I needed to know. That's when the most shocking part of all this happened. Both of them were alive, but completely apathetic, like they'd been frozen. That night, my dogs survived, but in a way, I lost them. I never heard another sound from them again. The vet said they were in shock, but aside from that, nothing was physically wrong. Years went by. No one ever went back to the house. And my dogs, they had become robots, without any interest in life. The happy, always ready, protective dogs I had known were gone. I don't know what happened to them or what they saw, but I also don't want to imagine it. What I'm about to tell you isn't a long or overly detailed story, but it happened over the course of months, right under my nose. When I was 24, I rented a small house in a town tucked in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. It wasn't isolated at all. There were other houses lined up along my street, kids riding bikes during the day, and you could usually hear someone mowing their lawn or sitting out on the porch. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected anything bad to happen. The house itself was old but cozy. 2 floors, creaky wooden stairs, and a basement I barely ever went into. I worked late shifts, so I was used to coming home when the neighborhood was already dark and quiet. Living alone didn't really bother me. At least, not in the beginning. The first time I noticed something was off, it was small. I came home one night and found a mug sitting on the counter that I didn't remember leaving out. I brushed it off, assuming I must have been tired that morning and forgotten. A few days later, I noticed food missing from the fridge. Nothing big, just leftovers I was sure I hadn't eaten. I told myself maybe I miscounted. Maybe I threw something out without thinking. But then I started hearing noises. Not loud, just faint shuffling sounds at night when I was upstairs trying to sleep. The kind of noises you chalk up to an old house settling. But something about them was different. It sounded like slow, deliberate movements, like someone trying not to be heard. One evening I was sitting on the couch when I noticed the light in the hallway flicker. I got up to check the bulb, and that's when I smelled something faint, like sweat. I was a little shocked that the smell might be coming from me, so I automatically raised my arm to check, like anyone would. The smell didn't get stronger, but I decided to take a shower anyway. When I came back downstairs, the smell was there again. This time much stronger than before. I repeated the same movement, but it seemed impossible that it was coming from me. I turned on the kitchen light and searched the room, almost expecting to find someone there. But of course, it was impossible. I was alone. Still, I went from room to room, trying to figure out where the smell was strongest. When I didn't find anything, I gave up the idea and decided to go to bed. But from that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I started paying more attention, double-checking the doors and windows before going to sleep. It all came to a head maybe 2 weeks later. I had a friend who was supposed to come over that Friday night after work. He was running late, so I settled in with a beer and some music. At some point, I heard the sound again. Slow steps moving across the floor above me. With the music playing, it would have been almost impossible to notice if the floor hadn't creaked twice. My blood went cold. I wasn't being paranoid. Someone was really there with me. I grabbed the nearest heavy object I could find and started to climb the stairs slowly. If someone was there, I wanted to catch them off guard. I wasn't prepared for what I saw next in the bathroom. There was a woman crouched over the toilet, drinking from it. The sight was so completely bizarre that I froze. Only when she finished and raised her head did she notice me, standing at the end of the hallway in shock. As soon as she saw me, she let out a sound and bolted straight toward me. I could have swung the object I was holding, but I was so disoriented by the whole thing, the sheer bizarreness of the scene, that the only thought I had was to run. I sprinted down the stairs toward the front door, but before I could reach it, she lunged and tackled me, sending both of us crashing to the floor. She was completely out of control, hitting me, screaming, striking me again. I was stronger, and I managed to drag her to the side, but in one quick motion she grabbed a lamp and smashed it against my head. The pain was so sharp it left me stunned, not knowing which way to turn. I don't know what would have happened next if my friend hadn't shown up. At that exact moment, I heard glass shatter from the front of the house. He had seen what was happening through the window and smashed his way inside. The sound distracted the woman just long enough for me to lunge forward, knocking her off balance. My friend grabbed one of her arms while I got to my feet and tried to hold the other. She fought like an animal, but eventually we had her pinned until the neighbors, hearing the chaos, called the police. When the officers finally dragged her out, I got a better look. She was thin, clothes torn, face covered in dirt. Seeing her being taken away left me genuinely sad. I have no idea what someone has to go through in life to end up in that state. That night, after they took her, I learned that she'd been living in my attic for who knows how long. She had been climbing in and out of the house through a tree that reached the small attic window. A few months later, I moved to another house. Not because of that, but due to other circumstances. Still, the truth is that ever since then, I don't go to bed without checking every single room in my home, including the attic. It's just a routine for me now, like anyone else locking their doors and windows before sleeping. For me, it also means making sure every room is empty. When I was 19, I lived with my parents in a small town in western North Carolina. People always think of the Appalachians as endless woods and cabins in the middle of nowhere, but our street wasn't like that. We lived on a small road with about 5 or 6 other houses, close enough that you could see your neighbor's porch lights at night. It felt safe, and I never really thought about danger because everyone knew everyone. Maybe to some people this isn't the scariest story they've ever heard. But for me, and especially as a woman, it was the most terrifying moment of my life. One Saturday night, my parents went out to a friend's party, and I decided to stay home. It was around 10 p.m., and I was stretched out on the couch scrolling through my phone with the TV playing in the background. The windows were open a little because the night air was cool, and I remember hearing crickets and the occasional car pass down the main road at the end of our street. Everything felt normal. It wasn't until I heard the crunch of gravel outside that I froze. Our driveway was short, and I knew exactly what it sounded like when someone stepped on it. My first thought was that maybe my parents had come home early, but I didn't hear a car. I muted the TV and listened. After a few seconds, I heard it again. Slow, steady footsteps right outside the window behind me. It was extremely rare for a neighbor to approach our property from that side without coming to the front of the house first, and that's what scared me. I stayed completely still, waiting for the sound to stop. A minute passed, and I repeated to myself that it was probably one of the neighbors cutting through our yard or maybe chasing after an animal. But then I heard a sound I had heard all my life, but at that hour, being home alone, it made my blood run cold. Our side gate squeaking open. That gate was old and barely ever used, so it almost never moved unless someone forced it. Someone had to be opening it. I stood up slowly and turned off the TV. Then I ran to the window and shut it completely. The house fell completely silent except for the faint sound of the gate closing again. Luckily, I'm not the type of person to ignore red flags. And even though I lived in a place where nothing ever seemed to happen, I had access to the internet, and I knew the kind of creeps that are out there. I grabbed my phone and walked quietly toward the back hallway. My parents always locked the doors, but I double-checked anyway. The back door was locked, the windows were latched, and everything seemed secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right outside. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, but I had that exact sensation that someone was standing just a few feet from me. After confirming everything was locked, including the garage door that often got left open, I went upstairs. From up there, I could see better through the windows into the backyard. I went into my room and sat on the edge of my bed, in a spot where I could clearly see the window that faced the back of the house. I waited. For a few minutes, nothing happened, and I started to feel stupid for getting so worked up. Maybe it really was just a neighbor, or some idiot who knew I was home alone and wanted to spook me. But then, I heard the unmistakable sound of the back door handle being tested. A slow turn, like someone was trying to open it without making noise. My heart started pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside would hear it. I couldn't tell which door the sound was coming from, but I was almost certain it was the kitchen door that led to the backyard. That door always gave off a faint squeak when it opened, and in the silence, I thought I recognized it. The handle rattled once more before stopping. Then came the softest knock. Barely there, like whoever it was didn't want the neighbors to hear. I don't know why, but that scared me more than anything. I texted my mom first, asking if they were on their way home, but she didn't answer. I knew I couldn't just sit there, so I dialed 911 as quietly as I could, whispering my address to the dispatcher. She told me to stay on the line and stay out of sight until officers arrived. Minutes felt like hours. I know it sounds cliché, but it's the absolute truth. I kept hearing small movements outside, like someone was walking along the side of the house. At one point, I swore I heard the sound of shoes scraping against the siding, like they were trying to climb up near my window. I crouched down on the floor, phone pressed to my ear, whispering updates to the dispatcher while I stared at the shadows shifting across the blinds. Fortunately, she had the calmest voice I had ever heard in my life. And even though I was panicking at the thought that someone might be trying to break into my house, she was without a doubt crucial for me, and I am immensely grateful to her. Finally, I saw flashing blue lights wash across the walls. The dispatcher told me the officers were outside, and moments later, I heard them shouting. I didn't move until the dispatcher asked me to open the door for them if I felt safe enough to do so. Obviously, whoever had been outside my house was long gone by then. But even so, the police stayed with me until my parents got home. After that night, my parents installed an alarm system, and I didn't stay home alone again for a long time. I've since moved into a new place, and I honestly thought I had put that story behind me. But sometimes, especially at night, that fear creeps back in. The fear of living alone, and the thought of someone standing just outside, trying to get in.